Chapter 4, titled Exterminate All the Brutes, Gaza 2009, written by Noam Chomsky, offers a detailed account of the Israeli assault on Gaza that began on December 27, 2008. This attack, meticulously planned for over 6 months, was characterized by both military and propaganda strategies. The assault, which coincided with a time when the streets of Gaza were densely populated, resulted in the death of over 200 people within minutes and marked the beginning of a broader campaign of destruction and civilian casualties. The chapter critically examines the legal, political, and moral justifications offered for these actions, highlighting the broader implications of the assault on Gaza and the historical parallels in Israeli military conduct. The Israeli assault on Gaza was not a spontaneous act but the result of careful planning over 6 months, with lessons drawn from previous military operations such as the 2006 invasion of Lebanon. The planning included both military tactics and propaganda efforts, with the timing of the assault designed to maximize civilian casualties. The attack on a police academy during a closing ceremony, which killed dozens of policemen, was legitimized by Israel's International Law Division under pressure from the army, despite internal criticism. The chapter notes that this legal justification blurred the lines between civilians and combatants, leading to a broad interpretation of who could be considered a legitimate target. A key tactic employed by Israel during the Gaza assault was the doctrine of going crazy, aimed at instilling fear and terror among the civilian population. This strategy, which traces back to the 1950s, involved disproportionate use of force to shock and intimidate the population into submission. The chapter argues that this approach reflects a long-standing doctrine of state terror, where inflicting pain on civilians is used as a means to achieve political ends. The chapter draws parallels with other instances of state terror, suggesting that this tactic is not unique to Israel, but is a common practice among powerful states. The assault on Gaza had devastating consequences for the civilian population, with widespread destruction of infrastructure, homes, and essential services. The chapter highlights the hypocrisy in the observance of the Sabbath by Israeli forces, who simultaneously denied aid to Gazans while continuing their military operations. Despite the scale of the destruction and the high civilian death toll, the international response was largely muted, with the United States blocking efforts at the United Nations to call for a ceasefire. The chapter emphasizes that the crimes committed during the assault on Gaza were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader pattern of US-Israeli actions in the region, supported by military aid and diplomatic cover from the West. The chapter situates the Gaza assault within a broader historical context, drawing parallels with previous Israeli military actions, such as the 1982 invasion of Lebanon. It argues that the same logic of state terror that justified these earlier actions was at play in Gaza, with the aim of crushing resistance and deterring any moves toward a political settlement. The chapter also explores the ideological justifications for these actions, including the dehumanization of the Palestinian population and the use of religious and nationalist rhetoric to legitimize violence. In the aftermath of the Gaza assault, the chapter discusses the failure of diplomatic efforts to address the root causes of the conflict. It argues that the US-Israeli rejection of the international consensus on a two-state solution, coupled with ongoing settlement expansion in the West Bank, has made a lasting peace increasingly unlikely. The chapter also notes the growing disillusionment among the international community, including younger American Jews, with Israel policies, suggesting that continued violence and repression may ultimately lead to Israel's moral and political isolation. This chapter concludes by warning that the ongoing cycle of violence and repression in Gaza and the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict threatens to erode Israel's long-term security and standing in the world. It argues that the use of state terror as a tool of policy, coupled with the rejection of diplomatic solutions, is not only morally indefensible but also strategically short-sighted. The chapter calls for a rethinking of Israel's approach to the conflict, emphasizing the need for a genuine commitment to peace and justice if a lasting resolution is to be achieved.